we're going to dive into some more of those details here with Bernie Sanders criticizing the media as well for how they frame the reconciliation package. Instead of actually sharing what the details are, the media tends to only cover the top line numbers, right? So you have these ridiculous, meaningless, callow questions like, well, what top line number would you be okay with? Where will you compromise? As though like there's any substance in just saying, well, 2 trillion or 2.5 trillion. You have to know what that's being spent on. What's actually in the bill? Otherwise, it's a totally meaningless conversation, right? And the media just kind of uses these big, scary numbers and fear mongers about it, and then asks the questions in that fashion. So it's covered like a horse race, right? Instead of covering the actual policy details here, instead of covering it like politics. But to dive into the reconciliation situation, and we have a whole lot to talk about in that arena today, I want to start with a clip from David Sirota on Breaking Points. David Sirota, obviously fantastic journalist. He is with the Daily Poster, and he went on to Breaking Points to explain his view on progressives' position on the reconciliation bill and what he thinks Biden should do if Biden is actually serious about the provisions that he claims and purports to want to be in the bill and have strong feelings about, right? Like free community college, for example, which the Biden administration has made a huge deal out of and refused to do anything about, even though they have the power to. That's a whole different discussion, which we'll get into here shortly. But this is David Sirota on Breaking Points.
Time for our weekly segment in partnership with the Daily Poster, highlighting their original journalism. Joining us now, we have the founder of Daily Poster, David Sirota. Great to see you, David.
Good to see you, David.
Good morning.
So you have an interesting piece out right now with regards to the reconciliation bill and where we're at. I personally think the Biden proposal is total trash. You are calling on the administration to call the bluff of Manchin, Sinema, and all of the other people who are more quietly dragging their heels. Let's throw this tear sheet up on the screen. You say, call their bluff right now. It's time for Democratic leaders to make Manchin, Sinema, and every other senator vote, and not on some gutted half measure, but on a real $3.5 trillion bill. Explain your thinking there.
Well, look, we've seen the negotiations whittle down this bill to, it looks like it's going to almost nothing. I mean, it started out, Bernie Sanders said it should have been 10 trillion. So he started out at 6 trillion. Joe Manchin said he could accept $4 trillion of spending. Then it went to 3.5 trillion. Then it went to 1.9 trillion. Then Manchin said it's 1.5 trillion. Point being that the delays continue to result in exactly what Manchin and Sinema and other conservative Democrats, what their donors want, which is basically a bill that is gutted or killed. We wrote about this back in August, which is what we said was that what was probably going to happen is that the House progressives who are saying that they're going to hold out, if they don't make their demands explicitly clear what exactly they want in a reconciliation bill, then likely you will see a process where the Democratic leadership guts that bill, just keeps hollowing it out. And you've seen Manchin and Sinema make periodic statements through the press. Oh, we don't like the tax provisions. Oh, we don't like the pharmaceutical provisions. Oh, we don't like the climate provisions. And every time they make a declaration like that, the White House and Congress go to work on hacking apart the bill. So the point is, instead of engaging in that process, instead of engaging in what is obviously a deliberate game, a game that Manchin and Sinema and their donors want to play, stop playing that game and put a real bill on the floor and simply have a vote. Now, that doesn't guarantee that Manchin and Sinema will vote for a good bill, but it basically puts them on the spot in a way that they're not on the spot right now. They have the best of both worlds right now. They get to make these declarations through the press, have the bill get watered down, have Democrats essentially negotiate against themselves, and never have to actually face an up or down vote. There's one idea there to have an up or down vote, put a bunch of stuff in there for Arizona and West Virginia, and try to dare them to explicitly vote against, major investments in their own state. And the fact that the Democratic leadership hasn't done this is really a signal that it's not necessarily all that serious about actually passing a real bill. This is something that the Democratic leadership could do right now. And it's been going on for weeks and weeks, if not months. And they have refused to do this.
David Srota on point as always. The Democrats here refusing to hold Manchin and Sinema to any form of account. There would at least be pressure on them if they brought this to a vote. And, you know, I don't know if you guys have kept up on what has been dropped out of that bill, but it really seems like every time Sinema or Manchin runs to the press and says, I don't like this part, or I don't like that part, or this is too much, Democrats then go and, you know, hastily chip away at their own bill to appease Sinema and Manchin in that regard. And it's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. I just want to point out that the last time Republicans held power, they basically passed their entire agenda through reconciliation on party lines. They didn't care about bipartisan bullshit like Biden seems to. They didn't waste political capital trying to say, we got to win because we worked with Republicans, or in their case, we worked with Democrats, right? They just got their agenda through because they had the power to do it. Republicans know how to wield power. Democrats do not. And a lot of that really, I should actually reword that in a sense. Democrats seem to very much misrepresent what their true agenda is. And therefore, when they have the power to enact the agenda that they purport to support, they refuse to because they don't, in many cases, actually support that agenda. There certainly are members of the party who very much support the reconciliation bill. I believe that. There are also many, many members of the party who don't really support it or don't support large portions of it, at least the $3.5 trillion that Bernie originally proposed. And therefore, they're all too happy to hide behind Manchin and Sinema and say, well, you know, I want it, but can't do it. Sorry. So you have this dynamic of a rotating villain, as it's been called, right? And I think that's a pretty accurate description. And if Biden wanted a lot of the things, you guys, here's the other part of this. A lot of the things that Biden claims to want that he wants put in this bill, he could just do by executive order. And that kind of reveals that he's a fraud on this, that he doesn't really prioritize them, or at the very least, that even if he supports the policy in theory, he's not going to act on it. It's not enough of a priority for him to do anything about, right? The community college thing is insane. Like the Jeff Stein, Washington Post reporter, said that one of the provisions that Biden and his wife both apparently feel very personally strong about is the free community college, tuition-free community college. Well, like, then why do they refuse to cancel student loan debt, you guys? That's something he could do by signing a pen. He doesn't need Congress to do it. You can do it by executive orders, just signing a piece of fucking paper, and he refuses to do it. So you see how it kind of reveals how much Biden actually cares about these issues, right? And that's also a no-brainer, you guys. It's not like there's reasonable opposition to that, right? It's a no-brainer. So I think Biden here kind of being revealed for having campaigned on issues that he never really intended to do a damn thing about. And he's now hiding behind Manchin and Sinema. And by the way, if anyone at home believes that, let's think back to the primary. How did they treat Bernie when it became clear that it was either going to be Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders that was the nominee for president? All of a sudden, a few strings are pulled behind closed doors, and boom, it's over. If you don't think Biden has strings to pull to whip Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin in line, you're out of your goddamn mind. You're drinking the Kool-Aid. Your gullible's written on the fucking ceiling if you believe that. Okay? I got a bridge to sell you. How many more metaphors can I give you guys? There's no way that Biden doesn't have a simple decision here. He can pull some strings behind the scenes and Sinema and Manchin will fall in line. He's choosing not to. The same goes for Chuck Schumer. The same goes for Nancy Pelosi. They're choosing not to. Do not allow their rotating villain to deceive you. Okay. So to dive into, I talked about, I want to cover the media's coverage in a sense, critique the media's coverage of this whole negotiation process. This is in The Hill. Sanders blames media for Americans not knowing details of Biden's spending plan. Senate Budget, there's an ad. Senate Budget Committee Chair Bernie Sanders blamed the media in part for Americans not knowing what is in a sweeping social spending plan being negotiated by the White House and congressional Democrats. Sanders, in a statement, said it is absurd that many Americans don't know what is in President Biden's plan, and while cautioning that there could be many reasons for that, launched a broadside against how the bill has been covered by the press. Notice how the Hill covers this, you guys. Launched a broadside. They make it seem like Bernie's being unreasonable here, right? They can't just frame it objectively. They have to, anyhow. Quote, the reality that the mainstream media has done an exceptionally poor job in covering what actually is in the legislation, Sanders said. There have been endless stories about the politics of passing Build Back Better. The role, by the way, terrible name. I mean, only the Democrats could come up with Build Back Better, for fuck's sake. The role of the president, the conflicts in the House and the Senate, the opposition of 2 senators, the size of the bill, etc. But very limited coverage as to what the provisions of the bill are and the crises for working people that they address, he added. Sanders' statement comes as Democrats are struggling to break through on the spending plan amid an intense focus on the price tag for the bill and weeks of high-profile Democratic squabbling over the still being negotiated legislation. Democrats want to use the spending bill to carry some of their biggest priorities, including expanding Medicaid and Medicare, new child care and education benefits, combating climate change, and overhauling the tax code. The specifics of what Democrats will ultimately include are still in flux as they try to figure the size of the bill and what policies can unite their razor-thin majorities. So you see how the Hill frames this, you guys. It's insane. They make Bernie seem unreasonable for criticizing the media here. Well, luckily for us, we have a little bit of a breakdown here. This is from Adam Johnson. And, thought I had that up on the screen there. There we go. Adam Johnson says on October 18th, that's Breonna Kyler, who's on CNN, mocked progressives' claims CNN hadn't covered the substance of the reconciliation bill, showing as proof random out-of-focus screen caps. If you haven't seen that clip, she basically threw up like a few articles that were titled "What's in the reconciliation bill" and used that as proof that the media has been covering the substance of this bill. It was so ridiculous. Anyway, and they were out of focus too. It was just so ridiculous. His colleague and I surveyed 12 CNN segments over a 4-day period. We found it was 91.3% horse race, you guys. They're not covering the substance at all. And in the few instances where it wasn't horse race, it was because they had like a progressive member of Congress on who was actually talking about the details. Someone like, say, Bernie Sanders. So she got all flippant and condescending and on her high horse and tried to tear Bernie down. It was quite a ridiculous segment. I'm also going to show you guys a little bit here from the actual article that he posted there. On reconciliation bill, CNN aired horse race coverage 11 times more than substance. CNN insists it adequately covers the substance of the $3.5 trillion social spending bill, but a survey of 3 of its major news programs tells a different story. A column survey of 12 segments on CNN's major news shows covering the reconciliation bill during the height of the debate reveals that the vast majority, or 91.3% of CNN's coverage, focused on horse race over the substance of the bill. The survey of CNN's coverage was done in response to an October 18th segment by CNN's Breonna Kyler, which mocked Senator Bernie Sanders for his claim that the mainstream media has done an exceptionally poor job covering what is actually in the legislation. You can watch the segment here. To offer evidence CNN has covered the substance of the reconciliation bill, Kyler quickly throws up a dozen screen caps ostensibly showing the outlet doing just this, but Sanders and other progressive critics of mainstream media didn't say CNN never covered the substance. They claimed they did an exceptionally poor job covering what is actually in the legislation. More broadly, a claim borne out in an analysis of CNN's coverage. CNN has millions of dollars at its disposal and could have easily marshaled several of its researchers and reporters to do a robust analysis of its coverage of the reconciliation bill, share these findings using open source means, and prove beyond any reasonable doubt that Sanders and other progressive critics were being unfair and lashing out without basis to do so. Instead, it just cobbled together 12 screen caps, several of which ran after Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Senator Sanders, and others started registering complaints about a lack of substantive coverage. Simply asserted progressive claims of media bias are outlandish and offensive, and moved on. So again, here you guys see, you get a look at how the media functions. It reflexively defends itself, and it will do so in very disingenuous and out of context ways, right? So she decontextualizes the whole thing. She throws up a bunch of screen caps, many of which were in response to the criticism from progressives that they had not covered the substance here. And she treats that as proof that the media has actually adequately covered this bill. It's absolutely insane. Great research here from Adam Johnson and his colleague to tell us that 91.3% of that coverage was just horse race nonsense. So, that's part of the problem here, you guys, is it's obviously a multi-pronged problem, but to whatever extent, and I'm not naive enough to think it's a large extent, but to whatever extent the mainstream Democrats actually support major aspects of this bill, they have completely neglected to message on that, right? With few exceptions, Bernie being one of them. But most of the Democratic Party has just utterly neglected to talk about what's in the bill. They just participate in the horse race and the top line discussions instead of diving into the substance. So that's one problem. The other problem is very much the media, and Bernie is 100% right here. And these provisions are very popular as inadequate in many cases as they would be. So what we've seen is a lot of those popular provisions negotiated out of the bill. Much of the climate stuff has been negotiated out of the bill, including the primary program that would have decreased carbon emissions. We see the child tax credit, instead of becoming permanent, it's only extended to like an extra year. So that's a huge difference right there. We see tuition-free community college cut from the bill. We see much of the expansion of Medicare and Medicaid cut from the bill. Basically all of the good shit, you guys. I mean, seriously. Like, it's a piece of garbage now. Even at $3.5 trillion, any regular viewers will know this. I was criticizing it for being inadequate as much as I thought, it's better to pass it than not. But even at $3.5 trillion, it was inadequate. Now they've chopped that in less than half. And what they've taken out is most of the best portions of it. So now it's just a complete piece of garbage. And this is what Biden will tout as a victory. And I think that they politically have Washington brain rot in this particular situation. I think that they have this mentality that passing anything is something that they can go brag about. And I think that they think that voters care about bipartisanship. So I think they actually think that if they pass this watered down piece of shit, they can go back to their constituents and say, see, we worked with Republicans for infrastructure and we did the reconciliation and, we're working for you. And I think they're naive enough to think that even as those voters look at that and go, that hasn't touched my life at all. Even as that's the case, I think that the Democrats are naive and ignorant enough to think that that will be a message that sells to their constituents. So they are allowing this bill to just be completely gutted. And that obviously was the plan from the start. And I also want to note, you guys, I wish I could cite who did this analysis. Boy, I wish I could cite who did this analysis. But some major lobbying group had basically come out and said that they were not at all concerned, a big business lobbying group, that they were not concerned about the $3.5 trillion bill because they knew it either was going to fail or get gutted. And they admitted in this, it was a leak of emails. And they admitted in it that the way they were going to attack it was by attacking the top line number out of context. So instead of saying you can't attack tuition-free community college, you can't attack expanding healthcare, you can't attack addressing the climate crisis. So instead, what you do is you attack the $3.5 trillion price tag and fearmonger about a big number without any context. It's totally unreasonable, it's incoherent, it's meaningless, but they know that it will work from a propaganda perspective. So that's exactly what they did, and it worked. And this, I just want to note, is why MMT is so fucking important, you guys. This is why it's so important. If the general populace understood MMT, they would not be frightened by some random number that's out of context. Okay? That would not be a strategy that would work. And if everybody understood MMT, then there would have to be a response from those in power in terms of how they go about messaging this stuff. And we would have chipped away at one of their most powerful propaganda tools. So cannot recommend, like, Stephanie Kelton, The Deficit Myth. Go read it if you haven't. Go to realprogressives.org and read our educational material on MMT, because it is very important to understand this stuff so that kind of bullshit does not work on you, that you're not fazed by their incoherent propaganda. So another aspect of this is obviously Manchin and Sinema, who, as much as they are the rotating villain, there are reasons why they are choosing to be the ones in this particular case. So this is in Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. They do great work. This is by Spencer Snyder. TV reports on Manchin and Sinema leave out their financial conflicts. So this is about how the media neglects to cover why Manchin and Sinema take the positions that they take. As of the October 31st deadline to vote on the bipartisan infrastructure, as the October 31st deadline to vote on the bipartisan infrastructure bill approaches, the media have made a project of examining Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema's opposition to the $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill, also known as the Build Back Better Act. Despite countless hours of coverage and conjecture about what might or might not get Manchin and Sinema to vote for the bill, the financial conflicts of interest that reinforce their reluctance to vote on the bill have been almost completely ignored. In a review of 21 relevant news programs airing on October 3rd and 4th on ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, and MSNBC, financial conflicts were discussed for only 45 seconds. In fact, some of the media have attempted to help insulate Manchin and Sinema against such observations. On ABC's Good Morning America, former Senator Heidi Heitkamp, who, by the way, herself is corrupt as all fuck, said the impugning motivation is harmful, and that I've seen way too much of that as it relates to both Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, and I think that needs to ratchet down. Well, gee, I wonder why Heidi Heitkamp, whose own intentions ought to be impugned, might say such a thing. Corruption is so pervasive in the media and in DC that that's treated as taboo to call it out, right? The television news media have instead chosen to engage in repetitious conjecture about what price between 1.5 and 3.5 trillion might be acceptable to which parties. One should note, as journalists rarely did, that 3.5 trillion is the cost of both spending and tax cuts over 10 years and represents approximately 1.25% of projected US GDP over that period. Sounds a lot less scary when you put it that way, doesn't it? Anyhow, so this is part of the problem too, you guys, is that the populace is so uneducated on the individual actors in this case. And Sinema and Manchin, their corruption is well documented. I don't need to tell you guys about it, you know. But the media has refused to report on that part of it. They just treat them as though they're principled, good faith actors who just happen to be more moderate, right? What they really are is corporate and conservative and corrupt. So great work here from Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting to figure out that the media is not at all covering what is the obvious incentive for Manchin and Sinema to oppose this package. So I am deeply disappointed by where we are. I'm not naive enough to be surprised by where we are, but I'm deeply disappointed by it. This, you know, the left constantly being told no on every little thing, even the most minor and compromised and moderate reforms, is, you know, to be in that state perpetually is it beats you down. It really wears people out. And I'm feeling that way. I understand that the viewers are probably feeling that way too. The little that we might have gotten, it seems to be swept out the door, right? How many months are we in now to Biden's administration? Again, not that I was naive enough to expect much, but boy, he even disappointed me. You know, congratulations. So this is, you know, and then and everyone watch in the midterms, the Democrats will come out and complain that the voters didn't turn out, right? You just watch. After they do fuck all, after they do nothing, they have both houses of Congress, they have the White House, they do nothing. Go back on promises that would simply take the signature of the president. They refuse to do it, and then they'll wonder, well, why didn't people show up at the polls? It'll just, that narrative, it's a cycle, right? It's a cycle. And then when Republicans take power and they're awful, it'll be, well, you got to put us back in because look how bad they are. It's just a cycle. So this is why activism, organizing, protests, strikes, very, very important. And we're going to get to some strike stuff later today as well. Right now, though, I want to talk